All right, for this demo, we're going to talk about taking your image and transferring it to your matrix. So here is my finished image, and here's my matrix. Remember, your matrix is the surface that you're going to be carving into, right? So in this case, you guys started off with 4 different thumbnail sketches. A thumbnail sketch is just a rough idea, right? So some of my drawings aren't completely finished. They're not very detailed. But after I chose my favorite one, I went through and kind of fleshed it out. So I added those details. I essentially made it look exactly how I want my finished print to look, right? So here's my image. What you're going to do first is cut it out so that it's the exact same size as the matrix. We're going to be taping this down so that it doesn't move. So it's actually even a little bit better if it's slightly smaller than your matrix. So we have it cut out. Then you're going to go over your drawing with a soft graphite pencil. So in this case, I'm using a B pencil. I just went through and went over my major line work. You might have just drawn in pencil, and in that case, you can skip this step. But I actually went over it in pen. You do want the graphite to be on your major line work. So what you're gonna do is you're gonna flip it over and tape it down to your matrix so it doesn't move. You don't need a ton of tape. I usually just tape the top and the bottom of my image, but you do want it to be exactly how you want it to appear on the matrix. So make sure it's nice and centered. Tape it down. After it's taped down, you're going to apply pressure over your image. So what that's going to do is it's going to take the graphite from your line work and push it onto the matrix. Our matrix is pretty soft, so it's going to capture the detail pretty well. Right? You can see that it transferred. You can lift up just one side and kind of see if you need to apply pressure anywhere else, but it doesn't need to be perfect. You are actually going to draw directly on the matrix. So as long as you can see the vague outlines, you can always make changes with pencil or Sharpie directly on the matrix. You'll also notice that it reversed your image and the numbers. So the 2 right here is backwards. Remember that you have to reverse things so that it prints the correct way. So here's an example of that. Right, so here's my matrix. You'll notice they're mirror images of each other. Sometimes with pictures, it doesn't matter if it gets flipped, but especially when you have numbers or text, you do want to flip it, otherwise it will print backwards, okay? So once my graphite line work is transferred over, I'm going to go over everything in Sharpie. So I'm essentially going to make this match this. So I'm going to add the detail, add the line work, and all of that stuff so it's ready to carve. All right, so my image is transferred to my matrix. I've gone over it in Sharpie. All the detail is there. It's really important that you make sure your image is set in stone before you start to carve, because once you carve, you can never go back, right? So here is my gouge. The way it works is the carving tips are stored inside the handle. So you should have 4 or 5 carving tips. And they change in size and shape. So let's arrange these really quick. Should be something like that, right? The smallest one is a number 1, so it's a V gouge. V gouges are really good for detail and tiny line work. So all of these tiny lines that I need to carve in between, I'll probably use the number 1 for most of it, right? Number 2 is also a V-gouge. It's just slightly bigger. So if I wanted to still get some detail but carve out some larger chunks, I might use the number 2. The number 3 is a U-gouge. U-gouges are really good for carving out large chunks of material. So for maybe this border and some of these interior spots on the pizza, I would probably use a U-gouge, right? And in number 5, some of you, by the way, have 3 or 4. They're pretty similar, right? A number 5 is the largest, and it's also a U-gouge. I don't know that I would ever use this one, maybe for the border, but it's really only meant for clearing away really large areas of space. You would not want to use this for detail work, okay? The last one you might have, some of you might not have this. I don't personally use this very much. It's a knife, so it's basically like an X-Acto knife. Some people like to carve around their line work to kind of protect it, and I can show you how to do that, but I typically don't use the knife, right? So I'm gonna set those to the side. The way your gouge works is if you unscrew the top, you should have 2 pieces in there. They come out like this, right? So you have one that kind of has a dome on the top and another really skinny kind of crescent shape. They fit together like this, and if you look at it on the side, they should line up. So if one is upside down, it's not going to want to hold your gouge very well, and you'll be able to see that they don't quite match. So you want to make sure they're fitting together the correct way. The dome side goes to the top of this, so I'm going to put it down in there. Let's put both of them in, right? Then I'm going to screw this on, but not down tight. So if I shake it, you should hear a little rattle in there. What that does is it lets the 2 pieces sit together, but they're slightly open, so that you can take one of your carving tools and insert it between the 2 and then tighten it down all the way. So once it's tight, you shouldn't hear any rattling. The base should go clear to the carving tip. So if it's not in correctly, it might look something like that, where it's kind of hanging out. It might be at a weird angle. That's pretty dangerous. So you want to make sure that the carving part is clear to the base and it's secured tight, right? So that's how the gouge works. There are some safety things that you need to consider. All of you were given some shelf liner. What that does is it helps hold your matrix in place without it sliding around. This just especially on the desks, can be really slick. And if this is moving while you're carving, it's really easy to slip and injure yourself. So you want to make sure it's on the shelf liner so that it's snug in place. Okay, so that's the first thing. Always use your shelf liner. The other things are pretty common sense, but you'd be surprised at how quick you can forget them. So the first one is that you always want to carve away from yourself. Again, it seems pretty common sense, kind of a no-brainer, but every time I will see students forget and either start carving towards themselves, or if they start to hold it up here, they're carving at an angle. It's pretty easy to kind of lose track at the direction of which you're carving, right? The other one is you always want to hold your matrix down behind the gouge, right? So a lot of times I'll see students hold it up here, and it is easier, it's more comfortable this way, but again, you're carving directly towards your hand, and it is really easy to slip and get a pretty nasty cut along this L shape, right? So always hold it behind your gouge. You also want to hold your gouge with 2 hands, right? So you're making basically a triangle. The top is your gouge and the 2 bases are your hands. This gives you more control over where you're carving, and also just always make sure that your hand is not in front of your gouge, right? So the way I do it is I like to hold my matrix down with basically my pinkies. So I'm holding, if you can see, with my pinkies and carving with both hands, right? So as you start to carve, you're gonna want to, if we hold this up profile, you're gonna want to enter your matrix at about a 45-degree angle. And basically it's like you're scooping out pieces of linoleum, right? So if I start right here, Again, I'm holding with both hands. I'm not carving towards myself. I'm on the mat, but I'm starting at a 45-degree angle, and then I'm going to kind of scoop out that tiny piece of linoleum, right? You don't need to go super down into the matrix. That's if your fingernail can catch the area you just carved, you've carved deep enough, okay? So again, you're going at a 45-degree angle down, and you don't have to go the whole way. You can take smaller chunks out along the way, right? So that's kind of it for safety. The biggest mistake I see people make is holding it with one hand and carving with another. Even if you're holding it on the side, you might be carving up here. It's really easy to forget and start carving somewhere else. So you want both hands on the gouge, carving forward. If you need to turn, so let's say I'm carving these weird kind of melty cheese areas. So I might start this way, and then I can always turn my matrix, right? I don't ever have to make a turn with my gouge. I'm just going to constantly be turning my matrix around to fit the direction that I need. So I might start carving from this direction. And again, I'm being pretty careful with my carving marks. You don't want to just kind of hack away at it because your image will come out messy, okay? Just to review, you are carving everything that is not in Sharpie. So all of this white space will be carved out, and all that will be left is the Sharpie, right? And that's what's gonna create your line work when we roll it up with ink.